Ito ang News TV Live. Nagpapatuloy po ang pagdinig ng Senado kaugnay ng panukalang pag-amyenda sa Saligang Batas. Panurin po natin.
2 linggo na po mula nung tayo nag-hearing noong January 17. This is the fourth hearing ng Committee on Constitutional Amendments tungkol sa pag-amyenda ng ating Saligang Batas. 5 katanungan ang ninais nating sagutin sa hearing na yon at naway ito ay magsilbing giya para sa ating talakayan ngayon, lalo na dun sa mga hindi pa nakapagbigay ng kanilang mga posisyon o kanilang mga statement. Una, kailangan nga bang amyendahan o baguhin ang 1987 Constitution? Kalawa, kung kailangan, ano ang mga dapat baguhin sa nasabing Saligang Batas? Pangatlo, ito ba ay gagawin sa pamamagitan ng isang Constitutional Convention o tinatawag na CONCON o ng Kongreso mismo bilang isang Constituent Assembly? Kung Constituent Assembly, kaapat na tanong, ang magaganap, boboto ba ang Senado at ang House of Representatives ng hiwalay o iisa o magkasabay? Joint or separate? At panghuli, maaari bang limitahin ng Kongreso ang kapangyarihan ng Constituent Assembly o ng Constitutional Convention? Inimbitahan po natin muli ang mga dating Chief Justice ng ating Korte Suprema. Narito pala muli si former Associate Justice Adolf Ascuna at former member din ng 1986 Constitutional Commission. Nag-imbita rin po tayo ng mga profesor, academicians na may dunong tungkol sa paksa ng Saligang Batas at sa usapin po ng struktura ng mga gobyerno tulad ng Federalismo, mga opisyal ng gobyerno at marami pang iba. Naging maayos naman sa aking paniwala at nabigyan po tayo ng feedback yung usapan at nakapag-ani tayo nung nakaraang hearing ng maraming kaalaman at madunong na sagot sa ating mga katanungan. Lahat ng punto de vista, kontra man o sumasang-ayon, pabor man o hindi, ay pinayagan po nating marinig sa isang bukas at maayos na proseso. Naging participatory ang proseso dahil tiniyak natin na makapagsalita ang lahat sa abot nating makakaya. Naging maayos din ang palitan ng mga kuro-kuro at opinyon at nirespeto ng bawat isa ang opinyon ng iba pang resource persons kahit kontra ito sa kanilang punto de vista. Ako po yung naniniwala, ganyan po ang isang senyales dapat ng masiglang demokrasya. Malayang talakayan, nirerespeto at kinikilala ang iba't ibang punto de vista sa isang paraan na bukas at transparent. And this will characterize this afternoon's hearing and future hearings of this committee. Because after all, we are all in a democracy. Gusto rin po nating tiyakin, ito na lang po, ang focus po nung nakaraang hearing ay ang aspeto ng legalidad at kung ano ang magbabago sa sistemang politikal ng ating bansa. Pero nagkaroon din ng usapin tungkol sa para saan nga ba ang mga ito? Para kanino? Kaya ngayon naman po, sa ika-4 na pandinig ng komite sa usapin ng charter change, bukod sa mga tanong na ito, nais din nating mas ilapit pa ang mga usapin sa kung sino ang pinaka-apektado ang ating mga kababayan. Gusto rin nating malaman mula sa ating mga resource persons. Una, anong buti ang idudulot ng tsa-tsa upang maiahon sa kahirapan ang karamihan sa ating mga kababayan? Ikalawa, makakatulong ba ito upang mapunan ang basic food at non-food needs ng ating mga kababayan? Makakatulong ba ito sa laban sa kahirapan at kagutuman? Makakatulong ba ang charter change sa matinding traffic sa Metro Manila at iba pang mga urban centers sa ating bansa? Makakapagbigay ba ng trabaho at patas na sahod, dekalidad at abot-kayang edukasyon at pangangalaga sa ating kalusugan? Ikatatlo, may sasaayos ba nito ang matagal ng problema sa pangungurakot na naghahadlang sa pagpapaunlad ng buhay ng mga Pilipino? Ika-4, ang sistemang politikal nga ba ang problema o ang mga namumuno sa pamahalaan? At panghuli, kailangan ba talaga ang tsa-tsa para matapos ang kahirapan at hindi pagkapantay-pantay sa ating republika? Bukod sa mga inimbita natin sa naunang pandinig, inimbitahan din po natin ang mga kinatawan ng iba't ibang sektor ng lipunan upang marinig natin ang boses ng mga pinaka-maapektuhan. Maraming salamat po at maaari na po tayong mag-umpisa sa ating talakayan. We will begin with, siguro umpisahan na po natin dun sa nakuha natin proseso nung una, lalo na dun sa mga hindi pa nakapagsalita. So, we will request a statement of anywhere between 5 to 7 minutes for those who have not been able to speak or hear for the first time. And then the questions from the senators will follow. We will begin with we will begin with the local governments because I understand Governor Dodo will be leaving, but Governor Boying will stay behind. But please, for your opening statement, Governor Mandanas, you have the floor.
Magandang hapon po at magandang buhay sa ating chairman, members of the committees, and all the participants in this very momentous hearing. With regard to the points mentioned by our chairman, ang League of Provinces of the Philippines, na ako po ang pinaka-chairman ng Committee on Federalism. Sa unang tanong po, ang LPP ay naniniwala na kailangang amendahan ang ating Constitution. Pangalawa, ano po ang aamindahan? Ang pag-aamenda po ng ating Constitution, ang amin pong napili, 3 lang pong sections doon po lamang sa article on local autonomy. Naniniwala po kami na ang pagbabago ay kailangan sa local autonomy. Kung pupunta tayo sa federalism o hindi federalism, kami po ay federalism. Pero ang definition po namin ng federalism ay napakapayak po, very simple. It is a system where there is a central government with autonomous units. Yun po ang federalism namin. Pagka yun po ang federalism na pinag-uusapan natin, meron central at merong autonomous regions, kailangan po may decentralization at talagang may local autonomy. Kaya 3 lang po. Ang una po, yung revenue generation. Sa ngayon po, ang mga taxes, charges, revenues that could be generated, kailangan po ay naayon sa Congress. Ang Congress po sa ngayon ay national part po yan ng central government. Kaya bigyan po ng kapangyarihan ang provinces and highly urbanized cities. Ito po ang mga namumuno sa ngayon ng local government units. Yung pong cities and municipalities and barangays, lahat po yan under the supervision ng provinces and highly urbanized. At yung highly urbanized and provinces, diretso po kami under the supervision ng presidente. So yun po ang definition namin sa revenue generation. Padalawa po, yung kabahagi sa mga buwis, mga charges and fees na kune-kolekta ng central government, ng national government, sa ngayon, ang kabahagi po ng local governments ay 40% lamang. Ang hinihingi po namin, ito ay dagdagan to 60%. At pangalawa, yung pong pangungulekta ng buwis sa mga provinces at kailangan po mangungulekta ay ang local governments na rin po, ang provinces na rin. At yung kabahagi sa nakolekta kaagad, ibibigay sa national government. Ano po ang nangyayari ngayon? Ngayon po ang nangungulekta, central government. Pagkatapos yung kabahagi ng local, ibinibigay po sa local. So babalik na rin po. Pati po yung halaga. Pangatlo po, amendment. Tatlo lang po ang aming hinihingi. Ang patatlo po, yung pong national wealth, natural resources, ang pamamahala, control, supervision, ibibigay po sa provinces or highly urbanized. At sila na po ang bahala sa other local government. Yung pong revenues, yung pong regulations, ipababahala na po. Halimbawa, Bansang Moro, sila na po ang ang may control, supervision ng national wealth. Pero sa revenues, ang kabahagi ng national, ibibigay po sa national. Ngayon, ang nangyayari, ang may control na supervision, national government. Yun po. At yung local government, binibigyan pagka nagustuhan. Kaya yun lamang pong tatlong yon ang aming doon po nakapokus ang mga local government, the League of Provinces. Ngayon, sa patatlo pong tanong, papaano isasagawa ang pagbabago ng ang amendment sa Constitution? Ang nabanggit ng ating chairman, ang pinag-aaralan ngayon ay Constitutional Convention na ito, bago may pagganap, alam natin, depende rin yan sa Kongreso. O kaya, Constituent Assembly, depende rin sa Kongreso. Ang aming pong local governments, ang mga provinces, gusto po namin buksan din ang pinapayagan ng ating Saligang Batas, yung People's Initiative, para po tunay na participatory, yung pong inclusive. Ano po? Dahil sa ngayon, yung po ang diwa ng ating Saligang Batas, kapares ng nabanggit ng chairman sa lahat nating hearings, kailangan bukas sa tao. Pagka po hindi natin binuksan ang pinto sa People's Initiative, hindi po buo. Kaya po, sumulat pa ako sa ating Senate President at sa ating Speaker of the House na buksan. Pero ngayon po, bago tayo nagsimula, kinonfirm ko ho sa ating dating Associate Justice, meron na hong enabling law. Ganon din po ang sabi ng one of our original framers ng ating 1987 Constitution, meron ng enabling law. Maaaring hindi pa, yung maliliit na bagay hindi pa buo. Pero sa kabuuan, dapat tanggapin na ng Kongreso, Senate po, at saka ng House of Representatives, na meron ng enabling law. Meron ng enabling law na pwede na talaga ang mga taong bayan, ayon sa Constitution, ay talaga magsusub, magpasana, magpaabot, mag-propose ng amendments. Yun po lamang. Yun po ang aming mga sagot sa tanong. Salamat po.
Salamat.
Nandun po ang ating mga detalye, apin din pong ibinigay nang baka po merong mga gustong magtanong. Tatlo lang pong susog. 3 amendments lang po. At saka, dun sa tanong pa, paano ito gagawin? Wala po kaming, sa susunod lang po kami sa Constitution. Kung gusto ng Congress, Constitutional Convention, o Constituent Assembly, kung ang gusto ay joint or several, wala po kami, kayo na po. Ang amin po lamang, buksan din po, tanggapin ng Congress na talagang mayroon ng enabling law na ang mga taong bayan ay pwede na rin mag-amend, hindi ko po sinasabing revise, mag-propose ng amendment sa Constitution. Yun po ang aming posisyon ng League of Provinces of the Philippines. Thank you very much.
Maraming salamat, Governor Mandanas. So we can now continue with the discussions unless Governor Boying, later on, if you wish to speak, you may ask to be recognized and the chair will do so. We can now have Justice Vivi Mendoza for your opening statement po. We will try to make this as diverse as possible, from the local governments, the League of Provinces. Now we have a constitutional law expert, my professor in both constitutional law as well as constitutional law review in the College of Law. Professor Justice, you have the floor po.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for this opportunity to express my views on some of the issues that are facing our country today on account of the desire in some sectors for a change in the governmental system of the Philippines. I think I can best proceed by answering your first question, and it is whether there is a need to amend or revise the Constitution of 1987. There are many provisions of the 1987 Constitution which are in need of amendment. The fact that it has lasted for 31 years does not mean that it is a perfect Constitution, and nobody, I understand, has made that claim. I happen to believe, however, that a Constitution must be a more or less permanent document that can endure ages to come and not be easily amended or changed as ordinary legislation. Nonetheless, although I think that there are many provisions that can be amended or revised, I do not believe that it should be amended in order to change the system of government from a unitary to a federal system. Nor do I think that this is the time to make a proposal for such a change. A shift to a federal system will weaken our republic, fragment our nation, and render at naught the many years we have spent to attain national unity. This country will be fragmented by such an attempt, and there will be attempts at secession. Number two, I do not think that this is the right time even to propose such an amendment, because this is not the constitutional moment for making it. Why? Mr. Chairman, there is just too much partisan strife in the land that prevents a national consensus from building up or developing. For this reason, I propose instead certain amendments as far as the system of government is concerned, maintain it, but promote greater decentralization. And I'm happy that one of the proposals for a federal system speaks of decentralization, although looking toward federalism. I would say stop at decentralization, because beyond that is a cliff into which we might fall and never be able to come back. Federalism will fragment this country, I repeat, and the failure of this experiment will be long-lasting. It will not just be like the impact of a Brexit, where the sovereign states can return to their former status as independent states. In the case of a component state trying to become a federal system, it will mean separation from the moorings, exposure, and making yourself easy prey to the cupidity of other states. It is as dangerous as that. Number two, it will intensify regional differences or encourage, if not create, such differences. We've been hard put at integrating the national society. You are going to reopen those fissures and promote regional differences, because the essence of federalism is asymmetric development, not only economically but culturally. Number three, the danger of village tyrants and village dictators is far more probable in a federal system than the development of a national dictator. We know that patronage politics practiced everywhere. We want to break up dynasties. We cannot seem to have the political will to do so. How much more if you break up this country into more or less autonomous units, each one to be ruled by a village tyrant. You know the development of politics in this country. It is not like the federal systems abroad, which had their own self-governing bodies, which were self-governing for that matter, before they joined the federation. But here, no, you're going to divide one nation that you already had formed and parcel this out. One secret of the strength of the federal system in the United States, according to its distinguished historian, Gordon Wood, is that the people, when they federated, were already self-governing. They had vast experience in local governments, and the parceling out was a parceling out of power from the bottoms up, not the other way around. That is the strength of the federal system. And indeed, federal systems are formed by self-governing territories in order to achieve unity and achieve strength. But in our case, no. We are already united. You are going to fragment the nation. What will happen? What will happen will be, at the very least, to weaken the bonds of this country. So for that reason, I think, Mr. Chairman, this is a proposal that I simply would oppose. Instead, I would propose greater decentralization, a meaningful one. We have already that in our Constitution and in our laws, but decentralization has not been fully practiced, observed, or implemented. We have not reached the end of the road. We have not reached the dead end. So we have not reached the bottom. So let us try decentralization instead of federalizing and dividing the country. Nor is this the time to speak of such a proposal. There's so much strife, political strife, in the country today. This is not the time. What we need is a constitutional moment when people's minds would be focused on higher things than petty politics to frame a constitution that we hope will endure. So that's all that I have to say with respect to this proposal. Is there a need to change the Constitution? My answer is yes, and I have proposals to amend the Constitution, but not to revise it in order to shift to a federal system. The proposed amendments I have are the following. I agree. Make the ban on political dynasties meaningful by directly prohibiting it in the Constitution instead of leaving it to law to prohibit it. Define or determine the degree of consanguinity or affinity within which persons must fall in order to be considered within the ban on political dynasties. Number two, there is an oversight in the present Constitution because originally it was assumed the lawmaking department would be unicameral. But because of the failure to amend two provisions of the Constitution, there is now a problem how Congress should be represented in the Judicial and Bar Council, but limited to one vote. I propose this provision. I suggest that this provision be clarified. Perhaps the senators, before coming to a question, they can sit together but decide which what to vote or how to cast their vote, but only one vote. Or I have no special attachment to the JBC. I'm ready to reconsider a return of making appointments to the judiciary subject to approval or confirmation by the Commission on Appointments, as in the old system. I cannot say that the system of selection at present is any better than the former system of selecting members of the judiciary. Third, Article 8, Section 4, Paragraph 1 and Section 9, concerning the filling of vacancies in the Supreme Court, has become controversial and resulted in the making of what are clearly midnight appointments. The problem briefly has arisen in this manner. The Constitution requires that vacancies in the Supreme Court should be filled within 90 days from the time the vacancy occurred. Vacancies in all other courts to be filled up within 90 days, but counted from the time the list of nominees is submitted by the JBC. It may happen, and it has happened, however, that this period for filling vacancies in the Supreme Court might coincide somewhat with the period during which the President cannot make appointments. And that is 60 days before the election for President and up to and lasting up to the end of June, which is the end of the term of office of the President. It may happen that the 90-day period may fall within this midnight period. Which one should be applied? To fill the vacancy because it is within, it was already past 90 days, or to ban it or take it out of that period. Supreme Court said that in the case of the President, the period for filling of vacancies in the Supreme Court prevails over the ban on midnight appointments. This has resulted in many appointments that have deprived the incoming President of the opportunity to appoint the Chief Justice and has produced many undesirable effects. I would suggest that something should be done to clarify this. I would, if made to choose, I would provide for the ban against midnight appointments, giving 90-day period for filling vacancies only secondary, but not make it prevail the other way around. The only reason given for the requirement that vacancies in the Supreme Court should be filled up within 90 days is to prevent the absence of a quorum in the Supreme Court, which is not a very high probability. Next, the vote required to adopt the articles of impeachment. Under the present Constitution, Congress, the House of Representatives, by the vote of 1/3 of its members, can adopt the articles of impeachment and send the case for trial to the Senate. 1/3, Mr. Chairman, is, however, not a rule. That's less than 1/2. The standard rule is majority rule, which is 1/2 plus 1. So I propose that this provision should be changed, should be amended by changing the vote required to adopt the articles of impeachment to majority and retain the 2/3 vote in the Senate for convicting. Another provision I would like to suggest should be looked into is the provision on human rights. Make it more independent, place it together with the constitutional commissions, although it is a one-man commission. It's not like the constitutional commissions, but nonetheless should be as independent as the Commission on Elections, the Commission on Audit, and the Civil Service Commission. And possibly also the Office of the Ombudsman, to place them beyond partisan politics. And lastly, this will probably require a revision. I think it should require a revision, would be a proposal to study, not necessarily to change, but study the possibility, the need for changing the nationality requirement of the Constitution. We require nationality in exploration, development, and utilization of the natural resources, in the operation of public utilities, in educational institutions, and in media. Now, the business sector is insistent in its call for a removal of this requirement, or at the very least, to leave this matter of changing this provision to Congress to be determined from time to time. I think there should be a serious look into this question of relaxing the economic provision, strictures on the economic provisions of the Constitution. But I do not agree that it should be left to Congress to determine that question with all due respect to its members. I think that would be abdication of responsibility on the part of those framing the Constitution. I would say, take responsibility for it. If you're not very sure, I would suggest a high-caliber study group composed of perhaps leaders of industry, experts in economics and law, and other relevant disciplines to make a report and recommendation to Congress or to the Constitutional Convention. And on the basis of that report and recommendation, for those in Congress or the Constitutional Convention to take a definite stand and not leave the matter to ordinary legislation. This is a constitution that should not be forgotten. It is a fundamental law, and it is a fundamental cornerstone of the Constitution that the economic provisions were provided in way back in 1935. So compelling reasons must be shown and clearly stated to justify a change of those economic provisions. And finally, the amendment clause. As I've been pointing out, Mr. Chairman, and this answers also the question whether Congress should, when sitting as a constituent assembly, vote separately or jointly. Let me say, not only vote separately, but sit or meet in joint assembly, joint session, and then vote separately when voting on particular questions. This is the provision of the Constitution with respect to 5 matters. First, to declare a state of war, Congress is required to sit in joint session and by the vote of 2/3 of all the members voting separately should declare the existence of a state of war. Number 2, Mr. Chairman, you as members of the National Canvassing Board sit together with the House of Representatives in a joint session where the President of the Senate opens the certificate of canvass and Congress, sitting as a board of canvassers, meet in joint session and by a plurality of vote determine the plurality of votes, declare and proclaim the president elected. Or by majority vote, break a tie in case of tie in the office of the president and vice president. Number 3, Constitution requires that Congress, when confirming the choice of the president of who the vice president should be in case of a vacancy in that office during the term of the vice president, that Congress should sit in joint session but vote separately to confirm the president's choice of the vice president. Number 4, when there is a dispute between the president and his cabinet concerning the president's ability to resume the duties of his office after he had once declared himself fit to return to his office, in case of dispute between the president and his cabinet, it is Congress by 2/3 vote sitting together but voting separately that is given the power to decide that question. In all of these cases, Congress does not perform legislative function. It is performing non-legislative function, and the amendment or revision of the Constitution is simply that it is not legislative, therefore it is not justified to sit separately and to vote separately, but that this manner of voting and sitting observed in those 5 cases I just enumerated should also be observed. When we know now that the failure to spell out this detail was simply the failure of the commission that drafted, the Constitutional Commission of 1985 that drafted the 1987 Constitution, that failed to provide for this after once agreeing to have a unicameral, but later on changing its mind, adopting a bicameral Congress of the Philippines. So it would be perpetuating the failure of the Constitutional Commission to provide for this contingency when we know very well that what it wants is joint session but separate voting in performing those non-legislative functions. It would be perpetuating that failure if we say it's not there, therefore we can do anything we want to do, taking that attitude. Now, should the Constitutional Convention or Congress itself undertake the amendment or revision of the Constitution? It depends, Mr. Chairman. Depends on the nature and purpose of what is proposed to be changed. Obviously, a change in the term of office, let's say of the President, from 6 years to 4 years, but with re-election, would simply be an amendment. But a change from a system of government from unitary to parliamentary certainly would be a revision. It is a paradigm shift in our constitutional order. It will change everything, even the way we think as people in a Republican state. Can Congress limit the powers of the Constitutional Convention?
Justice,
The last question.
before we go to that last question, you said it depends whether it is an amendment, for example, the term of office, or whether it is a revision, for example, from a unitary to parliamentary. Therefore, are you therefore saying if it is an amendment, perhaps a constituent assembly would suffice? But if it is a revision, then perhaps a constitutional convention would suffice. Is that because you were unable to complete that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. To be sure, the Constitution gives Congress the power not only to propose amendments, but also the calling of a constitutional convention. However, it is my opinion that a change in the system of government would require a constitutional convention. This is no longer purely statutory provision. This is already some, constitutional philosophy, if I may not sound too pedagogical.
Thank you. And for the last...
My last question to answer is whether you can limit the powers of a constituent assembly and the Constitutional Convention. Generally speaking, the powers of a Constitutional Convention are plenary. Plenary in the sense that The very purpose for allowing it to amend the Constitution or revise it is precisely to change what is in the provision of the Constitution. So it's plenary to that extent. But there are certain principles underlying the Constitution, Mr. Chairman, that a constitutional convention must observe. And the basic one is the government of the Philippines is a democratic and a republican system. You cannot, for example, in my opinion, propose a dictatorial form of government, because the Constitutional Convention derives its powers from the existing Constitution. And what is fundamental to the framers of the 1987 Constitution and also the previous Constitution is that the government they're setting up is democratic and republican. Make some variations, that's all right. But a dictatorial form of government, a dictatorship, is something that you cannot, ideologically, you cannot, although the Supreme Court in one case in an obiter said that you can even adopt any form of ideology as long as the people ratify it. No, sir. No, sir. Only a revolution can do that. But short of a revolution, constitutional change is limited to a republican and democratic system of government. Change everything you want to change, but not that basic bedrock principle of the Constitution. Can you limit the agenda of the Constitutional Convention? My answer, Mr. Chairman, in the abstract is that you cannot, as long as those principles that cannot be exceeded are observed. Nor can you place an agenda before the Constituent Assembly. However, since the Constituent Assembly is composed of the members of Congress, I think as a matter of agreement or self-limitation, the members of Congress, qua members of Congress, can come to some agreement that once converted into a Constituent Assembly, they will follow a set agenda. And to that extent, you can control the proceedings and prevent a runaway constitutional convention. Because the danger also is that a constitutional convention can be held hostage by a lot of provisions coming from different provisions. The only safeguard against that would be people choose the delegates they elect. But outside of that, aside from that, there are no safeguards. Now, finally, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you once again, but I want to conclude on this note. If we are to amend the Constitution, it is to improve the Constitution. Improve the Constitution. Make it more perfect. And to do that, as we amend the Constitution, I hope we also amend man's nature to conform to that Constitution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Justice Mendoza, for your inputs. We will now proceed with, my understanding is Professor Dr. Carlos has requested that she be allowed to proceed first because she needs to leave. In that case, we can have Dr. Carlos. And I understand, Doctor, you are also in favor of amending a number of provisions of the Constitution. So we will have you, after which Commissioner Christian Monsod would also have his position paper placed on record. Go ahead, ma'am. You have the floor. Oh, before that, we would like to acknowledge the presence of former Senator Joey Lina, who was also former chairman of the Constitutional Amendments Committee of the Senate. We also have Gary Secretary Teves is here with the two Garys and Secretary Olivar from the Foundation for Economic Freedom. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen. Did I miss out on anyone else? Dean Bacani is also here for the record of Notre Dame University. And I've mentioned the others already. We can proceed, ma'am. You have the floor. Oh, sorry. I beg your pardon. Attorney Alok Sales, PDP Laban Federalism Institute. Ed Tayaw, Executive Director of the LG Development Foundation. Professor, you have to speak because you were not able to speak the last time. You are there. And Asek Malaya, Jonathan, also from the DILG. And Ramon Casiple is back. Thank you for joining us. We hope to be able to hear from you later on. Please, Dr. Carlos, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Considering that you have so many resource persons, I'm going to truncate my sharing with you today. And I'll address some of the questions that you have put in the invitation to me. First of all, do we need to amend or revise the Constitution? You know, I'll take off from what Justice Mendoza noted in his final statement, that he's hoping that the Constitution will also change the nature of our people. Yes, essentially he's correct, because there are really two ways of changing society. One is the very long way of changing people, and the empirical evidence will point to us that it will take 3 generations to do that. 3 generations is 90 years, so that means everybody would be dead in this room and you haven't changed. The quicker way to change it is to change the structure within which the individual is made to operate. This is what is called political, social, and economic engineering. This is what we're doing. This is what we're attempting to do. We're changing the basic framework of laws, and we're hoping that the behavior correlates will come after. So the answer there is yes. What do we want to change? A lot of that, but let me just pick out some of them. First of all, you cannot legislate, nor can you put in the Constitution anything banning political dynasties and term limits. Why? You have the power to vote is constitutionally provided for and to be voted upon. When you limit that power, then that is antithetical, therefore, to the power to vote and to be voted upon. It's the same with term limits. I'm sure you've heard of that senator in the U.S., like, I think he was 100 years old and he was still there. In other words, if you have a good senator or a legislator, for God's sake, continue to vote for him. Of course, if he's magnanakaw and he's stupid and incompetent, well, don't put his name on the ballot. In other words, the power is in your hands, and the power is in the ballot. So I implore those who will be participant in those who will be drafting, please do not put anything there on political dynasties, because you should just allow the dynamics of the system to bring them about. Do not also put anything about the political party, because look at Germany, Mr. Chairman. If Germany had put that they're going to have only 2-party system, Angela Merkel will not survive because she is having a coalition right now, isn't it? Therefore, even the political party system, do not put it there, because it can be one party, bi-party, multi-party, depending on the dynamics of whatever is happening on the ground. All right, so term limits, you want to truncate the tenure of officers, you can do that very readily. And that means you change or reform the electoral system. You'll notice that when you change certain parts of the Constitution, the rest will move. In other words, you cannot just change one and fragment it and yung iba, frozen sila. The rest will move. When you adopt, when we decide to adopt a parliamentary system, you cannot have term limits, because in principle, the government of the day can be ousted anytime. And when they are elected again, that means, term limits and being able to elect them again, they do not come together. They are not computing. So, on the third, what's the third question? Whether it's Constituent Assembly or, to me, it doesn't matter. Why? The political situation on the ground is the same. Your political party system is broken. You change political color anytime you want to. Plurality is the rule that you follow, which means whoever gets the highest number of votes wins. And given our electoral setup, kung meron kang salapi, you have the organization, you have the wherewithal to win. All right, this is the one that you need to change. All right, so it doesn't matter whether you're electing people in the CONCON. You think you will get better people, better than what? Remember, you elected your senators and your congressmen, isn't it? So to me, as a political scientist, whether it's Constituent Assembly, Constitutional Convention, it matters little. Of course, it will cost you less if it's Constituent Assembly. All right, earlier, at the latter part of your presentation, Mr. Chair, you addressed issues like, is this going to, reduce poverty, eradicate 26 million poor, etc.? Is this going to solve transportation issues? Is this going to reduce corruption? The answer is, we don't know. Yes, we really don't know, because what we have been doing, by the way, lingid ko sa kaalaman ninyo, yung barkada ko dito, si Senator Nene Pimentel, ay 30 years ago po, ay umiikot na po kami sa buong Kapuluan. Pero po, ang pinapag-usapan po namin, yung federal system at parliamentary system, pero bilang political education po. So, natutuwa kami ngayon because, Mr. Chairman, from the margins, napunta na siya sa gitna, di ba? So, masayang-masaya kami ni Senator Nene. So yes, the answer is we don't know. We're simply saying that if you adopt a federal system, you are more likely to obtain certain kinds of results. And on the basis of empirical evidence, because we scientists always rely on data to make our determinations, hindi po chismis, there are more pluses rather than minuses when we adopt a federal system. In addition, alam niyo po yung unitary system, yan po ay lamang sa kolonyalismo at sa authoritarian regimes. Ngayon po, we are unraveling the nation state kasi po ang nation state ang source ng scourge ng lahat ng ating conflicts. I'm teaching, Mr. Chairman, a course on geopolitics in the graduate course. And in there, we are seeing how the Europeans had in fact dictated to us to have a nation state and therefore put up all these borders, which is the favorite, by the way, of that guy in Washington, D.C., to put up the walls. And what we're saying is that we already have committed to the ASEAN regional integration. We would like to move to a borderless world. Ms. Rivera here is my student, one of your staff, and I tell her, Rivera, we are not training you here in the UP to be a citizen of the Philippines. You're supposed to be a citizen of the world. This is where we're going. With due respect, Justice Mendoza, yes, we would like our young people to be citizens of the world. So I think there is a big chance when, the answer to the question when is, we don't know. When are we going to be prepared? Like tomorrow, let's do it. No one has the answer on when we are going to change. No one, it's just a conjecture. So I think I'll stop at that point, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Carlos. We now have Attorney Christian Munsod, former Constitutional Commission member of the CONCOM of 1986. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator. Thank you for inviting me. On the questions raised in your invitation, may I start with the issues of process before substance. On procedure, on the issue of a Constituent Assembly versus a Constitutional Convention, I agree that a Constitutional Convention has more merits, maybe more qualified people. But a Constitutional Convention of delegates elected by district will likely be dominated by the same political dynasties in the present Congress and may not be any more trustworthy. The fact is that the dynastic rule of an estimated 200 clans in our country is so deeply entrenched in our political system today that the assumption that a constitutional convention will have a different profile is a leap of logic. The same illogic can be said about the assumption that changing the structure of government will change the behavior of our politicians. In a constituent assembly, my position is that it should be a separate vote. I concur with the reasons already expressed in this committee about the the nature of a bicameral legislature, and that based on the principle of hierarchy of laws, charter change should at the least be treated the same as ordinary laws. May I add two more reasons, Your Honor. Firstly, under the rules of the House of Representatives, Rule Roman numeral 20, Section 142, it states, quote, "The adoption of resolutions proposing amendments to or revisions of the Constitution shall follow the enactment of bills," unquote, which of course means separate meeting and separate vote. They may have been overlooked by some people. Secondly, there is at least one precedent on the vote. There are two other provisions where the Constitution prescribes a vote of, quote, "all the members of the Congress," unquote, without specifying whether joint or separate vote. Namely, Article 6, Section 28 on tax exemptions, and Article 12, Section 19 on the grant of amnesty. In 2010, President Aquino granted amnesty to now Senator Trillanes and others, and he had to replace Proclamation number 50 with Proclamation number 75 to correct, among other things, that there was, quote, "concurrence of a majority of all the members of the Congress," unquote. Proclamation 75 was then approved in separate meetings and separate vote by the House on December 13, 2010, and the Senate on December 14, 2010. On the issue of whether a resolution by both chambers can limit the powers of a constituent assembly or a constitutional convention, my answer is that a CONCON or CONAS has plenary powers, just like Justice Mendoza, to take up anything, even a new constitution. And this being an extraordinary power given by the Constitution, no resolution by the Congress can limit that power. I have been asked if the Constitution is just an overreaction to the Marcos dictatorship and was written in anger. May I take this opportunity to explain, Your Honor? What I can share is the mood and context of the 1987 Constitution. It was one of celebration and of hope. It was a historic moment of solidarity when the rich and the poor got together in a peaceful revolt, and we promised one another a new social order. That is why, according to former Justice Cecilia Muñoz Palma, the President of the Commission, the heart of the Constitution is social justice. That is why the Constitution can be described as affirmative action to correct the injustices of the past to the poor and to dismantle feudalism that has been impervious to change to this day. It is also a constitution of limitations, as all constitutions are, to make sure that the abuses and wrongs of the past are never repeated, which includes the oppression of colonizers, where, for example, the 1935 Constitution was amended to give Americans parity rights. Moreover, we could not change our exchange rate without the approval of the President of the United States, even after our independence. This led to a foreign exchange crisis in the 1950s. Hence, the constitutional provisions to ensure that our economy is safely and firmly in Filipino hands. The never again provisions also apply to the Marcos dictatorship, with its human rights violations and a disastrous economy where we did not recover our per capita gross national product of 1983 until 2002, or about 20 years. If there is anger, Your Honor, it was not when we were writing the Constitution. The anger is today when we see that the promise of a new social order is not being kept. And there are people even blaming the Constitution, which has all the provisions to fulfill that vision. The problem is not the Constitution, but our legislators who slept on the job for 30 years to fully implement it. Or when reform legislation was passed, made sure that it was watered down and underfunded. This is the legislature that wants to rewrite the Constitution. That is why, Your Honor, that's why the PDP Laban Institute version of the Constitution is so disappointing to us, because PDP Laban was very much a part of EDSA. Why is it pushing for a federal parliamentary system which they admit does not directly but only indirectly address the twin problems of mass poverty and gross inequalities that is central to a new social order? Moreover, PDP Laban delegated the rewriting of Article 12 on the economy and Article 13 on social justice and human rights to the Federation, to the FEF, Foundation for Economic Freedom, some of them are here, a think tank of the academe and business. The result is that the social justice provisions in Article 12 and 13 have been replaced by the themes of business. In other words, social justice is no longer a compelling principle of the Constitution, but is just another means to economic growth like globalization, free trade, market-driven solutions, international competitiveness, and increased foreign direct investment. In Article 12, the references in the Constitution to such principles as distributive justice, the use of property bears a social function, and industrialization based on sound agricultural development and agrarian reform have been deleted, about 7 sections, or revised, about 18 sections, including reversing the priorities of the economy. Quote, the just distribution of opportunities, income, and wealth is now secondary to more production and productivity. These changes are based on the FEF proposal that land ownership, the use of natural resources, the operation of public utilities, and the rules on media, advertising, and even education are better left to ordinary legislation. The issue of Filipino ownership would be open to transactional legislature at which the business community is most adept. Article 13 on social justice and human rights has the most deletions of provisions, other of course than legislative and executive, because the FEF proposes that labor, agrarian reform, urban land reform, and housing are also better left to the discretion of Parliament. Doesn't PDP Laban know that if they remove social justice as the central theme of the Constitution, there will be hell to pay from the poor? As my former colleague Heidi Yorak used to say, let justice be done though the heavens fall. At this point, may I raise this question? If federalism and parliamentarism are critical to our future, why is there no mention at all of federalism or parliamentarism in the Philippine Development Plan 2017 to 2022 and Ambition 2040? I quote the plan and the launching, quote, on October 11, 2016, President Rodrigo R. Duterte signed Executive Order Number 5, approving and adopting the 25-year long-term vision entitled Ambition 2040 as a guide for development planning. According to EO5, the Philippine Development Plan now and succeeding ones until 2040 shall be anchored on Ambition 2040. EO5 recognizes the need for a bold vision and effective development planning based on a forward-looking approach that goes beyond a single administration. It also emphasized the centrality of people in development planning and their aspirations as requisite for the design of government interventions to achieve development outcomes. course, the question is, how does the Philippine Development Plan to address the uneven development among the regions? The plan exposes in Chapter 3 of the plan a National Spatial Strategy, NSS, that recognizes, among others, the very unequal distribution of production and income of the Philippines among its regions, with 3 regions, NCR, Calabar Zone, Central Luzon, responsible for contributing 63% of the country's GDP. Obviously, the other regions cannot support themselves. The rest of Luzon accounts for 10.3%, Visayas 12.4%, and Mindanao 14.5%. The NSS, National Spatial Strategy, aims to decongest the NCR and direct growth to key centers throughout the country, and seeks to redress spatial and socioeconomic inequalities by linking lagging regions with leading regions, rather than advocating the uniform dispersal of development which can create diseconomies and inefficiencies. The NSS thus forms a network of settlements to maximize the benefits of what we call economic agglomeration. This is how the Philippine Development Plan, through the National Spatial Strategy, addresses the problem of unequal development in our country. With respect to the fiscal decentralization to support the PDP plan, I'm so glad that fiscal expert Professor Rosario Manasan is here, because she can do this, and she can also talk about the consultations that have already been conducted nationwide in 2014, where there was consensus on some 20 amendments to the local government code to ensure fiscal decentralization. Federalism, decentralization, parliamentarism are means. It is the ends that drive the means, and not the other way around. According to the President, the purpose of charter change is to improve the quality of life of all Filipinos, especially the poor. That was also the articulated purpose of 6 previous attempts at charter change. All of them failed. 2 were struck down by the Supreme Court, and 4 were withdrawn for lack of support. They were all perceived as driven by self-interest. In short, they were all about power. The quality of life is about addressing mass poverty and gross inequality. As the chairman said, it's also about the daily insecurities of ordinary people on criminality, drugs, the inadequacies and red tape of government services, corruption, and the front line. All these are issues of governance which can be addressed by the powers of government today if well done, as shown by the example of Davao City at the micro level. PDP Laban admits that the shift is a complex and lengthy process with its uncertainties. That is why its timeline to complete the shift is at least 11.5 years, including 1.5 years to enact a new regional and local government code that is in effect a revised local government code of 1991. If the plebiscite is held in May 2019, the transition will end at the earliest at about 2030. During the transition, the existing local government officials, those elected in 2019, will constitute the regional commission with both executive and legislative powers until the organic laws for each region are enacted and the regional officials are elected. That's the carrot for them to deliver the votes for the Cha-Cha train, a term of 11 years from 2019 to 2030. According to the summary of the PDB Laban draft, number 1, in the transition to a decentralized system of governance, we need a popularly elected president to hold and unite the country and ensure the transition to federalism will be successful. We need an effective president to deal with powerful countries like China and the United States and a globalized world. We need a president who can decisively address numerous national security problems and natural disasters. And it says, a pure parliamentary system without strong political parties can be unstable. It will take time to build strong political parties. We need a president to ensure that there is no gridlock in our political system. I believe that the president being referred to is President Duterte. President Duterte has said that he would step down when the shift is approved. That would be about 2019, and his term ends 2022. Can he resist the call that he alone can make sure that the shift will be successful? My question is, what if he dies before his time? He will be 85 by 2030. He has the same ailments of seniors like me. What will happen to the country with a constitution tailored to him? That's the problem when we place our destiny in the hands of one person rather than on institutions. During the transition period, legislation will be enacted to develop the human and resource capability of poor regions. Federalism, I am not against federalism per se, but at the right time, when the preconditions for its success are present. Because a messed up change in structure is virtually irreversible and may lead to the ruin of our democracy. I submit that there may be an alternative to an immediate structural change by 2019. The question is, if the regions can develop through legislation the competence, financial and organizational capacity, and the human resources to qualify as a federal state, why the need for federalization now? Besides, federalization without sovereignty, as suggested by the PDB-11 proposal, is nothing more than an enhanced multi-level unitary system, which is already mandated by our Constitution and needs only reforms to legislation such as an equalization fund, change in the sharing of IRA, and a better designed coherent expenditure assignment, tax assignment, intergovernmental transfers, and improving the capacity and creditworthiness of sub-national units. All those can be done by legislation. So instead of a premature structural shift to a federal parliamentary system, why not start enacting now the fiscal decentralization and other legislation that will already devolve more power and resources to the 14 poor regions and the LGUs? That may be a more productive exercise than a cha-cha. In addition, why not also enact an anti-dynasty law up to the fourth degree of relationship and applicable to the 2019 elections to demonstrate the sincerity of our legislations about real change? Enacting laws against their own interest is the best way to earn the trust of the people. Once the dynastic system has been replaced by a strong political party system, the anti-dynasty law can be amended to apply to only a second-degree relationship. If the reform legislations are not passed or do not work, they can keep on trying, because a messed up reform through legislation can be corrected, unlike a change in the structure. In closing, if the reform legislation and fiscal decentralization work, and the 14 regions are able to stand on their own, that would be the right time to consider a shift to a federal parliamentary system, initiated by the regions themselves in a bottom-up approach rather than dictated from above as presently envisaged. That is really the better way to federalization. Strong states getting together to form a strong union that can successfully stand up to our enemies and successfully compete in a globalized world. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Chairman Monsod, Commissioner Monsod. We will allow the Foundation for Economic Freedom. I believe you have a PowerPoint presentation so that we can, have also, after which we can have, considering that Commissioner Monsod mentioned the PDP and the Foundation, we will allow them to have their presentation as well so that we have a balance in the flow of our discussion.
When will we do the presentation, Mr. Chair?
Yes, you have the floor now.
We brought the PowerPoint.
Is it ready? And I understand, Dean Santa Maria, after which we will acknowledge and give you the floor so that you too can make your presentation. Pinasagot ka lang. Yes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have a short PowerPoint presentation that I will walk the room through, and then afterwards, Secretary Teves, to my right, is also a fellow in the foundation, will assist will really run the question and answer session. My name is Gary Olivar, and both Secretary Teves and I are here on behalf of the Foundation for Economic Freedom. We like the PowerPoints because, as Professor Carles said earlier, we really ought to be working from the facts and from numbers and data when we make our statements. Okay, here we have a brief summary of the legislative history behind the proposals that we have put forward. This has not come out of the blue. This is just the latest in a series of initiatives over the last several years, many of them involving the Senate itself. There were attempts in 1999. In 2005, there was an initiative to revise both the political and economic provisions. More recently, in the 16th Congress, Senator Dillon and Congressman Belmonte sought to insert the phrase, unless provided by law, into the constitutional provisions that limit foreign ownership in parts of the economy. Joint Resolution Number 1, proposed by Senator Gordon, likewise sought to put the same device in place, inserting that phrase. A similar resolution, again, by Congressman Belmonte and Senator Recto, also sought to amend the provisions by inserting the phrase, unless otherwise provided by law. So you'll see from this history of initiatives that there is already this momentum towards opening up the economy through the constitutional language. What we in FEF have tried to do, instead of just relying on the phrase otherwise provided by law, is to take the bull by the horns, approach the problem systematically, and propose a new language that addresses the liberalization issue as well as the secondary issue of making the Constitution more readable, simpler, and flexible, which, by the way, also has implications for economic efficiency, as we will see later. Next slide. Why do we want to amend these economic provisions? They are binding constraints to growth that result in lower investments, fewer jobs, poor infrastructure, and non-inclusive development. Protectionist provisions that limit foreign ownership do not promote healthy competition at a time when we have to compete in a global economy. Lastly, the Philippines is one of the few countries left in the world where restrictions on foreign ownership are still embodied in the Constitution. I will note that in the last 25 years, the Philippines is I think, the only ASEAN country or Asian country that has failed to cut its poverty rate by half. That is, I submit, not an achievement for the framers of the original Constitution to be proud of if they want to posit a connection between the Constitution and our performance on anti-poverty. Next, please. What were the guiding objectives and principles that we adopted in our study group? I believe one of the earlier gentlemen spoke about the need to set up a group to study these changes. That, in fact, is what we have tried to do, okay, at FEF in support of the constitutional change process. First, we had the objective of ensuring or strengthening free competition, and in the process reducing our dependence on a few large companies and monopolies in the country. There is a growing cry these days against oligarchies. This is part of what we try to achieve. Secondly, to promote market efficiency based on the competency of producers and the enhancement of consumer welfare. We submit that the presence of market inefficiencies provide opportunities for rent seeking as well as diminishing the opportunities to grow our economy and feed our people. So it's important, we think, to improve efficiency. Thirdly, to enhance international competitiveness by meeting trade agreement obligations and increasing foreign direct investments. Next, please. Okay, as I said earlier, this does not come out of whole cloth. The third item in President Duterte's original 10-point socio-economic agenda when he took office involves, and I quote, increasing competitiveness and the ease of doing business, as well as pursuing the relaxation of the constitutional restrictions on foreign ownership. So it's a vision that's been clearly enunciated from the start of this administration. It is also a vision that has been supported by various business groups who have singled out constitutional amendments to ease foreign equity restrictions as their top priority among 12 reforms that they hoped would be approved in the incoming 17th Congress. Now you will see from the makeup of these groups that most or many of them actually comprise local businessmen, local business groups. These are people whom you might expect to put up opposition or to express opposition against greater foreign direct investment. On the contrary, as noted by earlier speakers, they have been among its most outspoken advocates because they too realize the advantages this can bring not just to the country but to their own businesses. Next. Now, we are aware that the Philippines lags behind in foreign direct investment. From 2000 to 2010, you will see among this is the 6 major ASEAN countries: Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines. The Philippines is at the very bottom. This is the dotted line connected by circles, okay? Well behind pretty much all of our 5 big neighbors. Now, is there a relationship between this and our dismal performance on poverty reduction? We think so. Next. The Philippines is also one of the most protectionist economies in Asia. If you look at the hard copies you have and just eyeball, okay, the restrictions between the Philippines at the top row compared to the restrictions in other trans-Pacific partnership economies as well as other ASEAN countries, you will see that in almost every case, the restrictions imposed in the Philippines are more severe than most, if not all, of the other countries in the peer groups being discussed. And this is across the board in all sectors, from mining to agriculture to light manufacturing and so on and so forth. So it is clear we have a protectionist economy that lags in foreign investment. Again, is there a relationship between this history and our dismal history in poverty reduction? Again, we think so. Next. Philippine agriculture, we can zero in on Philippine agriculture. It is both small and protected. If you look at the foreign equity allowed across these different ASEAN countries and the contribution of agriculture to GDP, there is a general relationship between size and contribution to GDP of agriculture. Next. Now, we maintain that there is no reason that land ownership may be restricted if this turns out to be the public policy supported by the majority, especially by the leadership of the country. But there is no reason this should be set forth in the Constitution itself. If you look at Malaysia, they have no land ownership restriction in their Constitution. It's reflected instead in their National Land Code. In Singapore, the same thing, no restrictions in the Constitution. It's reflected in the Residential Property Act. Thailand, same thing, again expressed in their Land Act Code. Okay. Next, please. Well, if we go back, I want to go back to the earlier slide. I guess what we're saying here is, I think the Senate and the Congress and the House can really be trusted more with taking care of issues like this, including land ownership, than certain speakers in this room are willing to give them credit for. We at FEF are certainly willing to give them credit, as well as credit to the democratic process that put them in their positions and that gives them the responsibility to guide this country. Next. I mentioned earlier that Professor Sikat, the late Professor Sikat now, in 2004, they maintained that, and this, of course, the two Sikats are an economist and a political scientist. They maintain that constitutions should be simply written based on general principles rather than specific rules, allowing greater freedom of movement of the factors of production in pursuing economic activity. Should something go wrong, governments can always introduce ordinary laws to control the framework of economic policy and allow greater economic activity, while also redirecting the course of economic process to change undesirable outcomes. In other words, the more dynamic and fast-moving an economy is, especially if exposed to the global economy, the more the need for flexibility. And as a previous speaker said, okay, if we are not willing to trust Congress with economic issues like this, why should be willing, as I think he has expressed, to trust them with the political changes that are otherwise being proposed in a new constitution? We simply cannot have it both ways. Either you trust Congress all the way, or you don't trust them at all. We are willing to trust Congress. Next. What are the main arguments for constitutional reform? As I said earlier, efficiency gains. We cannot be seen as truly open when our fundamental law remains protectionist and inward-looking, as well as rigid and inflexible in structure. Strategic industries can still be protected by ordinary legislation. Constitutional reforms of the type we propose signal the international investor community that the Philippines is open for business. Okay. Next. The second main argument for constitutional reform in the directions we propose at FEF is to take back a weak state from the oligarchs. Okay. Property economic management is stymied when economic oligarchs also control the state. Any constitution is written by the victors of history. When we speak of giving preferential treatment for Filipinos, we should also ask, which Filipinos are we talking about? The nationalist argument is belied by our successful open Asian neighbors who maintain open, robust, and growing economies despite maintaining their strong nationalistic traditions. Next. Third major argument for constitutional reform is to reduce corruption. When you have constitutional restrictions on foreign ownership, then the Philippines, the host country, ends up more likely to select a bad foreign investor because of the asymmetry of information rather than a good one. What happens? The restrictions screen out good investors who are willing to comply with the law, or else make the cost of compliance prohibited. Meanwhile, the bad investors who are willing to break the rules are therefore the ones likelier to remain standing. This increases the risk of selecting a bad investor. Naturally, when you've got bad investors being favored by the rules, this also increases opportunities for corruption, because then these bad investors are in a position to conscript and to seduce public officials to work for their interests instead of the public interest. We suggest, in lieu of constitutionally based restrictions, what the state must do instead is to exercise effective oversight and regulatory powers, I think improving in that area is part of what the whole federalism movement is about. I want to stress that the Foundation of Economic Freedom takes no position on the issue of federalism and parliamentary makeover. Okay, so I'm here as FEF head on behalf of FEF, basically just to talk about the economic reform provisions. Next, please. Okay, we go to several claims, okay, that have been raised against the propositions we made. There is a claim, for example, that on land ownership, it's not a real issue anyway, because foreign firms can always lease land for up to 75 years, and foreigners can own condominiums only up to 40%. Okay? Restrictions on foreign control are not a restriction constraint either, because foreign investors can still maintain control or ownership by liberal interpretation and similar measures. What this claim posits then is the availability of opportunities for investors to work around the rules. These are precisely opportunities I mentioned earlier that tend to favor the dominance of bad as opposed to good foreign investors. Okay? These restrictions increase the complexity and uncertainty of the rules of the game, thereby in that process, again, increasing opportunities for corruption. Okay. Next claim. For some reason, a claim has come out that foreign direct investment has played only a minor role in the growth of most high-performing Asian economies. We respond, there's considerable empirical evidence from various studies of the positive effect of foreign investment inflows on economies. These effects can be positive and direct. For example, in the case of Asian economies like China that have been tested by various statistical causality tests, they can also be indirect because the extent of foreign investment is an indirect indicator of economic openness, which of course we believe is, and studies have established, is the most important, has been the most important factor behind the rapid growth of newly industrialized Asian economies. In short, countries that successfully attract foreign investment, direct investment, can finance more investments and grow faster than those that deter foreign direct investment. I'll remind you of a recent news item that talked about Vietnam, a nominally communist state, aggressively soliciting foreign investment, opening up their economy. Okay? If a communist state like Vietnam understands this, I would like to think that we who are not communists also understand this. Next. There is the claim that the Philippine economy has been able to expand at high growth under the present constitution. Therefore, there's no need to fix the constitution. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. In this respect, we note two things. One, our growth has historically been driven primarily by consumption rather than investment. The fact of the matter is, as I mentioned earlier, the Philippines has attracted the least amount of FDI in the last 25 years. Two, given our history, it remains questionable whether the Philippines can sustain a long-term high-growth path without massive and sustained capital inflows. Okay. I think that the recent trade reforms and the recent initiatives to fund and initiate a massive infrastructure program again brings up the issue of the need for sustained and long-term capital to fund our growth plans. Next. Okay. Their claim is that the factors that affect foreign direct investment actually include physical infrastructure, skill levels, etc. With or without constitutional reforms, attracting FDIs will continue to be a challenge unless these factors are addressed. We think, in response, that while there are indeed other important factors, okay, that affect foreign direct investment in our country, this does not mean that there are no benefits to be derived from amending the restrictions in our Constitution. It is not an either-or proposition. We maintain that constitutional reforms are not a panacea, but they do have a major role to play. Okay? It will send a positive signal that improves the perceptions of our country's investment climate abroad. I think we have one last slide. Next. Okay. Again, President Duterte is not in favor of relaxing foreign restrictions. Why does the study group support foreign ownership of land? We refer to academic studies that show a positive relationship between opening agricultural land to foreign ownership and improving agricultural productivity. Nonetheless, we do not propose giving our lands away. We're only saying that restrictions on land ownership are more suited to ordinary legislation, which is the practice in many of our neighbors as well. Next. Okay, can we skip that? It's a minor issue. Therefore, to summarize our proposed reforms, we believe that the new constitution should commit the country to the essential principles and objectives of economic growth, higher productivity, equity of opportunities, and appropriately regulated open competition. Is there some meaning to be read in the fact that growth precedes redistribution? I believe there is, but it is not a sinister meaning. Before you're able to redistribute the pie more equitably, you ought to have a pie that is large and growing. Otherwise, distribution becomes meaningless in alleviating poverty. That's what drives this sequence of priorities to our mind. Next, we believe we should, on the basis of this, we ought to delete the references to preferential treatment of Filipino citizens. The objective here is to maintain global competitiveness, but of course with due regard for reciprocity of treatment from other countries. Restrictions may be restored if deemed necessary at that time by Congress through ordinary legislation. If we're going to trust Congress with political issues, we see no reason why we can't trust Congress with economic issues as well. Next. Okay, this is now in terms of charter writing, the need to replace very specific details with general policy statements. Okay, in areas of concern like natural usage, natural resource usage, rural development, etc. Okay, these policy statements remain in place. We have just trimmed down the details. The details may be set forth instead by specific legislation and/or by requirements to notify and/or seek congressional approval. The objective here is to maintain flexibility and freedom for Congress to write the appropriate legislation in the future. Next. Seek simplicity and clarity of construction. Under the language we have proposed, okay, the related verbiage will reduce from about 3,000 words to just over 1,100 words. The less is said about an issue in the Charter, the more freedom the legislative and judicial branches will have in the future to appropriately respond on that issue. Next, please. Salamat po.
Thank you, Secretary. We'll now have the PDP Institute. And could we, we're limiting it to 5 to 7 minutes. If you need an extension, just let us know. But because we still have other resource persons. Thank you. Go ahead, Asek Malaya. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I first speak as a representative of the Department of Interior and Local Government?
Please, go ahead.
Because the DILG has been directed by the President to lead the national campaign among the people for a federal system of government. And later on, maybe I could also address some of the issues raised by Chairman Christian Monsod about the PDP Laban model. I am joined here by the other members of the PDP Laban Federalism Institute, Mon Casiple, Secretary Gary Olivar, Secretary Gary Tevez, Attorney Alok Sales, and Professor Edmond Tayo. They may perhaps also wish to speak to explain the models, the PDP Laban model of federalism.
You can proceed with your statement. If they wish to amplify, just let us know. But let's keep it tight. Thank you. Go ahead.
First, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much to our chairman and to the members of the Committee on Constitutional Amendments for inviting the Department of Interior and Local Government to this very important hearing. Let me begin by stating that the unitary state has existed in the Philippines for the past 500 years. It is a vestige of the colonial era. The centralized system of government was entrenched under 3 colonial regimes: Spain from 1521 to 1896, the US from 1899 to 1941, and Japan from 1941 to 1945. By the time we gained independence in 1946, the unitary state institutionalized the logic of extraction to serve the ruling elite and their colonial masters. It has also continuously superimposed the concept of one nation, one state, conveniently overlooking the existence of various ethno-linguistics and ethno-linguistically distinct groups within Philippine society. Unfortunately, these colonial legacies that found form in our unitary state would be institutionalized in the 1935 Constitution, written during the American period, and later revived in the 1987 Constitution. Since independence, we have been burdened by an over-concentration of political, administrative, and fiscal powers in Manila, which prevent full support and services from benefiting the farthest reaches of the country. It is the position of the DILG that simply amending the local government code will not lead to true national development, but to the same stunted growth and uneven, lopsided development across the different regions of the country. If we retain the unitary state, the rich regions, the rich cities, and the rich parts of the country will continue to be rich and will continue to grow, while the poor regions will stay poor. Devolution under the same unitary state framework will lead to the same results as previous piecemeal attempts at decentralization, like the Provincial Government Reorganization Act, or RA 2264, the Barrio Charter Act of 1960, the Local Government Code of 1983, and the Local Government Code of 1991. Despite our long experimentation with decentralization, through all of these piecemeal legislations, the National Capital Region, Central Luzon, and Region 4A currently accounts for 62% of our entire gross domestic product, while the rest of the country, including my region, Region 5, or the Bicol region, together with the rest of the regions of the country, account for a mere 38%. For 2016, the budgets of Metro Manila and Luzon account for 56% of the entire General Appropriations Act, compared to an allocation of 16% for local government units. And to exacerbate the problem further, the traditionally poor regions of the country slipped further behind. An example of the bias of the unitary system towards the center is this. The local government code has devolved health, environment, and agriculture functions to local governments. But despite the passage of 25 years, the budgets of the Department of Health, DENR, and the DA continue to grow exponentially, while the funds made available to the LGUs, be it provinces, municipalities, or cities, continue to be limited, if not stagnant. And the national government continue to exercise health and environment and agriculture functions even at the local level, despite the clear mandate of the local government code that these are now devolved to the local government units. Thus, despite the local government code of 91, the system is not working for the benefit of the entire country. It may be working for some, but it is not working for all. It is biased towards the center, the national government, and the traditionally rich regions of the country. Rather than enhancing decentralization, the unitary state has impeded it. As explained by Dr. Tihanki of De La Salle University in our book, Debate on the Federal Philippines, we have reached the limits of expanded authority under a centralized form of government. Dr. Tihanki continues, our collective experience as a nation has shown that local governments continue to be shackled in a domestic, colonial, and over-centralized structure. This limits the space for local governments, especially the small and poor municipalities, in taking initiatives and becoming self-reliant. The dependency relationship between the central government and the local governments has reduced much of our local governments as mere brokers of assistance to their constituents. The normal system in our local governments is they have to go to the national government to ask for projects. They are merely brokers to be able to bring projects from the national government to the local governments. These brokerage functions mirror the extractive role performed by local governments even during the colonial era. The logic of extraction, unfortunately, has been embedded in our unitary state at the present time. It is the DILG's position that this structural problem cannot be addressed by piecemeal reforms within a unitary state framework. It is our conclusion that true decentralization cannot and will not happen under a unitary state. If we wish to improve the lives of the vast majority of our people, and not only the few, or not only the center, or not only the traditionally rich regions of the country, but also the traditionally poor regions, we have to adopt true decentralization. To us, federalism offers a more viable alternative because it is the highest form of decentralization there is, given its inherent principles of shared rule and self-rule between the national government and the constituent units. Mr. Chairman, your second question which you sent to us is, if so, what parts of the Constitution should be amended or revised? And I would like to quote from the Quest for a Federal Republic, the book on federalism, copies of which have been sent to all senators, including your office, sir. And to answer this question, we approach this question based on the following principles. One, there is no one-size-fits-all model of federalism. Federalism scholars contend that there are as many federal models as there are federal countries. Every federal country has a distinct model that works best for its own country. Countries who wish to shift to federal system like the Philippines must discern our own version of federalism according to our peculiar conditions. Therefore, we can only look at the models of other countries, but we have to design our own federal system. Therefore, it is important to learn from the experiences, whether good or bad, of existing federations. Number two, there is a different context to federalism in the Philippines. Many of the established federations in the world, like the US and Australia, are examples of coming together federalism, meaning they were independent states that decided to band together. We are, on the other hand, are an example of a different form of federalism. We are a holding together federalism because we are already a unitary state shifting to a federation. Thus, many of the standard features of federal countries like shared sovereignty between the federal and regional governments do not apply to us because of our different contexts. So the fear that if we shift to federal system, our country will be dismembered is based on the premise of a coming together federalism. Since our federalism is different, it is a holding together federalism, there is no possibility of our country being dismembered. Finally, there is no need to come up with an entirely new constitution. We agree with the critics of federalism that the 87 Constitution has many good provisions that need not be changed. Thus, we have taken a surgical approach towards amending the fundamental law of the land, concentrating only on the articles and provisions that would enshrine federalism into the Constitution and strengthening our public institutions, among others. Thus, there are articles in the 87 Constitution that are left practically untouched, such as the articles on the Bill of Rights, citizenship, and suffrage. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, I do not have a lot of time, but the entire model of PDP Laban is in this book, which copies have been given to the Office of the Senators, and this is also available in bookstores, in particular Rex Bookstore, so that the people can freely find out what is here.
Okay.
Finally, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to take too much of the time of the committee, but let me just put on my
This is winding up already?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
I do not wish to take too much time of the committee, but just to address some of the concerns raised by Chairman Christian Monsod, I would like to put on my PDP Laban hat and thank him for reading the PDP Laban model. Because it's important that when we have this national discourse on whether we go federal or not, we should have a common model to discuss. And it is to his credit that he took the time to read the PDP Laban model. But with all due respect, nothing in the PDP Laban model states that the incumbent president, President Rodrigo Duterte, will serve continuously until the 10, 12, or 15-year transition period. There is nothing in this model, because we were the ones that prepared it, that will give the president unlimited time in office. The president himself and his spokesman, Secretary Harry Roque, has continuously stated that the president will not serve a day beyond the term to which he was elected, and that an extension of his term is the greatest blunder that he would commit. So who are we to impose on the president who do not wish to serve beyond? Secondly, Mr. Chairman, nothing in the PDP Laban model states that the local officials will continue to serve as members of the Regional Commission in the transitory period without being elected to those positions. All of those governors or mayors who will form the Regional Commission during the transition period will have to be elected to their specific positions. And once their term ends, they will have to be elected again. Serving in the Regional Commission does not mean that they have unlimited stay in their positions. Whatever is the term of office, they will have to respect. So I'm afraid that the critics of federalism are seeing monsters when there are none. They are using the problem of the specter of fear, because since federalism is a totally new concept, and since a totally new concept is not easily understood, they are propagating a lot of fear among our people, questioning even the motives of those who are proposing a federal system of government. With that, Mr. Chairman, just give me one last point. On the question of land ownership, it is the position of PDP Laban that land ownership should be retained by Filipinos. In this case, we disagree with our friends from the Foundation for Economic Freedom. We wish to continue and limit land ownership to Filipinos because we believe that that provision needs to be retained under the 87 Constitution. Once again, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to express our views, and maybe we can give the floor also to the other members of the study group to be able to address the other concerns raised by the other resource speaker. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Asik Malaya. Just for the record, the fears of Noel and term extension actually may not have come from the Institute, but the Speaker Alvarez mentioned no election, and Senate President Coco Pimentel mentioned term extension. So it's not. I agree. The Institute has not mentioned this, but some leaders of the PDP have. So that's just for the record. We now have Dean Santa Maria, and then a resolution that will be read by Mayor Ed Pamintuan, and then we have Senator Lina. Please proceed, go ahead. And we would like to thank our resource persons for your patience. I know that marami pang magsasalita, kaya ako naman ay nakikinig, and all these transcripts will be provided to members of the committee. So all your inputs actually are vital and much appreciated and very important. And then of course, Congressman Nery Colmenares. Please go ahead.
Maraming salamat po, Honorable Senator Francisco Pangilinan. Unang-una po, kami po ay nakikisama sa mga paliwanag ni dating Commissioner Christian Monsod sa pag-resist sa isang constitutional convention. Constitutional amendments to the Constitution. Kagaya po ng nasabi nyo, Senator, February 2, 2018 is the 31st anniversary of the 1987 Constitution. Nothing is fundamentally wrong about it. Its overhaul must be anchored on urgent reasons, just like the case of the 1973 Constitution. No doubt the latter provided the autocratic infrastructure that caused the country's legal, political, and economic bankruptcy in 1986. Ferdinand Marcos became a dictator executing the laws. Amendment numbers 5 and 6 also allowed him to legislate, making the Batasang Pambansa a farce. Marcos' exclusive power to select magistrates made the judicial independence almost an illusion. The 1973 Constitution empowered Marcos to arrest people sans probable cause determined by the courts. And even without actual rebellion and invasion, he can declare martial law and suspend the writ of habeas corpus, indefinitely jailing anyone without charge. Finally, Marcos was provided constitutional immunity even after his term, making him unaccountable to the Filipino people. The result was the grossly unrestrained larceny of the Treasury. Quoting Executive Order Number 1, 1986, the PCGG was established for the recovery of ill-gotten wealth accumulated by former President Marcos, his immediate family, relatives, subordinates, and close associates, whether located in the Philippines or abroad, unquote. And then, we have the 2013 Human Rights Victims Reparation and Recognition Act, also recognized the, and I quote, summary executions, torture, and forced or involuntary disappearance, and other gross human rights violation committed with impunity by the Marcos regime. The 1987 Constitution changed all that. From a despotic rule, power dispersal, and check and balance among the executive, legislative, and judiciary became the government's framework. Social justice, public accountability, human rights, respect for life, gender equality and sensitivity, protection and integrity of our national territory, resources, and economy are all its hallmarks. And now, some people want the 1987 Constitution changed. But is there any pressing urgency for it, much like in the overhaul of the 1973 Constitution? There is none. Chacha, as it is called, is an advocacy not grounded upon a fundamental necessity. There is no showing that all or most of the country's problems are traceable to the 1987 Constitution. For example, is a change to a federal government really timely? Does it assure, as we have heard from other resource speakers, liberation of the marginalized, equitable distribution of wealth, and unification of the country? Will it foment double taxation? Will it ban political dynasties, or on the contrary, encourage autonomous states to be kingdoms of political families? Can improvement just be made by creative, legislative, and administrative actions? If the problem is how the financial gain should trickle down the poor, surely the solution is a matter of perspective and policy, not changing the Constitution. And on martial law, likewise, public accountability is evident under the 1987 Constitution. We witnessed the fate of former President Marcos even Corazon Aquino, Fidel Ramos, Joseph Estrada, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, and now Benigno Aquino III, after their terms, cases meritorious or otherwise were filed against them. Do we want to change that too? Do we like to have that opportunity also for some other future presidents? And on martial law, President Duterte expressed his desire to make its declaration less difficult. Is this not dangerous? And considering his preference for a longer than 3-year term for local officials, is this their real motivation to side with Chacha? President Duterte's allies argue that Chacha must be pursued because the presidency was won based, among others, on this platform. Going along with this simplistic view, it is equally arguable that because of this platform, he became a minority president, obtaining 39% of the votes, signified that 61% of the electorate. Most probably, if we accept this logic, we're against Chacha. Recently, President Duterte created a consultative committee to study the Constitution's overhaul. But in any event, the threshold question will always be Chacha's propriety. Tinkering with the Constitution based on non-fundamental motivations is a transgression of the sovereign will enunciated and enshrined in the 1987 Constitution. Ultimately, the problem may lie not upon the 1987 Constitution, but on government officials misinterpreting, misapplying, and at times brazenly disregarding its mandate. Chacha being the red herring, distracting the citizens from what probably actually is mismanagement of the government. That's my answer to number 1. And number 2 will follow. There is no more need for amendment. And on number 3, of course, it should be the Constitutional Convention. And it is a question of trust, Mr. Senator, unfortunately. Because as we speak today, I think no one of us will say that we probably 100% trust the members of the House of Representatives. More than anything else, it is a question of trust. And we do not have it now. It's not timely to let them have the powers to amend the Constitution. And number 4, separate, not joint. The government framework under the Constitution is one of dispersal of power and not concentration, and of checks and balances. And in that spirit, it is a no-brainer. In case of ambiguity, it must be interpreted in line with the dispersal of powers and check and balances. And as to what the power, can the Constituent Assembly or the Constitutional Convention be limited in its deliberations? The power, as Justice Vivi Mendoza said, is plenary. And since it proceeds from the 1987 Constitution, it does not make any limitation. And my position is that it's plenary. That is all, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Mayor Ed Pamintuan, and then Senator Joey, and then Congressman Neri. Please, and then, okay. Okay. Very quickly, and then we will also have Governor Boying. Go ahead.
Okay, salamat po.
Can you
Present.
Can you turn off the mic, please, Dean? Thank you. Go ahead.
May I be allowed to present to this body, Mr. Chair, the collective manifestation in support of the 145 strong officials and members of the League of Cities in their appeal now to revise the Constitution through a Constituent Assembly. The League of Cities of the Philippines, the mandated association of 145 cities across the country, believes that it is high time to amend the Constitution for the benefit of 40 million Filipinos residing in the cities. I may be differing with some of my former colleagues in the Office of the Solicitor General here and some of you, our resource speakers, for postulating differently from your opinions. While local autonomy is guaranteed under the present Constitution, powers remain with the national government, and the League of Cities of the Philippines believes that the present government structure, where policy-making and implementation are highly centralized, has become less responsive to the needs of local government units. In fact, we've been here since 9 o'clock in the morning. We've been attending the same hearing that Congress would like to again toy with the idea of converting small towns into cities. We really would like that we get our power direct from the Constitution, not from Congress. 2, or 3 rather. Regardless of the method to amend or revise the Charter, the sovereign will of the Filipino people ultimately prevails whether to accept and adopt the same in a plebiscite or referendum, and the overwhelming mandate given by the Filipino people to our President in the last elections and in the latest SWS survey. Because since 2014, our President has been going around the country. In fact, in my province, he went there, especially in my city, twice. And he was already campaigning for a federal form of government since 2014. The latest SWS survey is a strong testament of the people's desire for genuine change and therefore should be respected. And after more than 1 year and how many months, he still is being given a favorable endorsement of our people. Number 4, the League strongly believes that the country is at critical juncture to effect and realize genuine change, and the time is now. 5th, despite the passage of the Local Government Code of 1991, which provides for the shared and devolved powers between national and local governments, the system of government remains highly centralized and unitary, thereby highlighting the differences rather than similarities of every Filipinos. The proposal to create a Bangsamoro state can only be supported under a federal government, which can address the concerns of separatists demanding autonomy over the administration of Muslim Mindanao. In light of the current discourse and debate on federalism, the proposed shift to a federal form of government from a unitary requires a substantial change to the 1997 Constitution. With difference to the constitutionally conferred power of Congress pursuant to Section 1, Paragraph 1 of Article 17 of the Constitution to convene itself as a constituent assembly for the purpose of amending and revising the Constitution. The League expresses its assent and trust that this is the most practical, swiftest, and expensive method of amending the Constitution. Following the principle of subsidiarity, which provides that political decisions are better taken at the local level than by a central authority, cities being the closest to the people can better articulate the sentiments of our people. The League of Cities of the Philippines urgently appeals to both houses of Congress to revise the Constitution through a constituent assembly, as I mentioned before. That the League supports the inclusion of transitory provisions that guarantee smooth transition from unitary to federal form of government as warranted by law and democratic principles. This is to defer with what one of my colleagues have said, that we should first strengthen the institution. You cannot strengthen the institution for another 5 or 10 years. You have to federalize and have a transitory provision to take effect. That's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ed. Senator Joey Lina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unlike you during my time, as chairman of the Senate Committee on Constitutional Amendments and Revision of Codes and Laws. There were not any proposals at the time to change the Constitution because the Constitution, when I was senator, was only 1 year old. And so I just concentrated on bills with regards to revision of laws. Well, having said that, I shall address myself only to the question of whether there's a need to amend or revise the Constitution with regard to the system of government. My position here is born by my experiences as a local government official, as government of the province of Laguna, as the founding president of ULAP and president of the League of Provinces, and also as one-time governor of Metro Manila and general manager of the Metro Manila Commission, and to top it all, as secretary of the Department of Interior and Local Government. So I have a very close understanding of the workings of the national as well as the local government. My answer to the question, is there a need to revise the present system of government and shift it from unitary or from the present system to a federal system? My answer is no. I did not use the word unitary because, and also federal. I would try to shy away from these two labels because there are as many models of a unitary system as there are many models of a federal system. So let me just describe what is the present system that we have. And my conclusion is, if we examine the present system and compare it to a federal system defined in general terms, I come to the conclusion that there is no need to change the present system because decentralization, local autonomy, and the principle of subsidiarity, which are the hallmarks of a federal system of government, are all embedded in the present 1987 Constitution. In general, federalism is defined as a system of government where the governmental powers are divided or distributed between the national or central government and the constituent units, which can be a state, a regional government, or local levels. That is a general definition of federalism, which one can Google, and one will see that general definition. Decentralization. Our Constitution is very clear. The state shall ensure the autonomy of local governments. This policy is not handed down or being doled out or granted to the local governments. Local autonomy is a state policy, meaning the people were the ones who bestowed that principle of autonomy to local governments. So it's very clear in our Constitution that we have one government with two levels, the national and the local. And the local levels will address local concerns, and they are autonomous. And by the word autonomy, we mean self-rule, the power and the responsibility to take care of your own local concerns. And this matter became very clear to me when I was governor of the province of Laguna, when I often declare that in Laguna, the national government is irrelevant. We will chart our own destiny. We will craft our own programs and projects that will benefit the people. And I am guided by Section 16 of the Local Government Code, the General Welfare Clause, which says that everything and anything that will redound to the benefit of the people is the concern of the local government. Of course, I'm just paraphrasing it, but it's a little verbose. the General Welfare Clause. It talks about the extent of powers and responsibilities that go to culture, to ecology, to preservation of health and sanitation, economic prosperity, social justice, full employment, peace and order. They're all there in Section 16 of the Local Government Code, which is the implementing law that the Constitution directed Congress to enact. And this Local Government Code must have a system of decentralization and accountability of local government officials. So, local autonomy is something that should really be internalized by all of us in government. That as far as local concerns are to be looked into, it's the local people. They have to decide through their representatives, through their mayor, governor, board members, sanggunian. They have to decide what is best for them. But of course, in Laguna, I could not put up my own national defense. I cannot print my own, our own currency. I cannot enter into international treaty. I cannot put up my own customs and quarantine. I cannot have my own maritime laws. I cannot have my own weights and measures and all other things that are of national concern. But as far as local concerns are to be considered, we can decide what is best for us. And that is the principle of local autonomy and the principle of subsidiarity, which means the smallest unit or even the lowest unit are in the best position to address their common problems. So it's there in our Constitution. And my position here is, while these hallmarks, decentralization, autonomy, and subsidiarity are already embedded in our Constitution, which can qualify us as a federalism, Philippine style, consistent with what the PDP Laban Director Maglaya said, or Asek Maglaya said, that each one has his own country, can have their own model of federalism. I say that we have federalism, Philippine style. And the President, and in our Constitution, the President can organize administrative regions through executive orders. As a matter of fact, all of the regions in this country were created through executive orders. It is within the power of the President as the head of the executive and as overall general supervisor of all local governments to create administrative regions. The latest one is Negros. Of course, President Noynoy created one Negros. President Duterte returned the Negros Occidental to Region 6 and the other Negros to 7. And so, if we want to really rationalize the number of regions, we can reduce the number of regions from 7 or 18 to 11 or 12 to make them more viable. Now, our Constitution, Section 14, Article 10, gives the President that power. What is the purpose of the creation of regional development councils? Or as the Constitution says, or other government bodies, regional councils or other government bodies. This can be checked, Section 14, Article 10. It's composed of local government officials, composed of the regional heads of the departments, and also representatives of the non-governmental organizations. What are the purposes? There are three. One, for administrative decentralization. Exact words from the Section 14, Article 10. Number two, to strengthen the autonomy of the local governments within the region. Meaning, local governments are autonomous, but they must have a say on matters pertaining to the region when the programs and projects will impact on them. So, it's an extension of the autonomy of local governments. Number three, reason for the RDCs is to accelerate the economic, social growth, and development of the region. The Constitution is clear. It has just to be implemented. The problem is not the Constitution, it is in the matter of implementation. So what can be done without creating regional governments as yet, although it will still be discussed for a long time. I do not know if it's Chacha or Constituent Assembly. But it can be done right now to empower the regional development councils. Secretary of the DBM can be instructed, together with an executive order or administrative order, that in the preparation of the budget, make sure that all the regions will have a share in the national taxes. So the decentralization, therefore, here, from the national to the region, can be effected within the Constitution. And of course, Congress, if it adheres to the principle of local autonomy, will have to agree with the executive initiative that the funds of government must be equitably distributed among the regions of the country. It's there in section 14. Unfortunately, from 1987 to the present time, these regional development councils are simply set aside. I sat in the Regional Development Council. We were very enthusiastic, proposing a railroad system within Calabarzon so that we can be closer to each other, so that we can deliver our products from Rizal to Batangas and so on and so forth. We have plans about a Laguna development, Laguna Bay, so that Rizal and Laguna can have a better exchange of goods at a faster rate. And all the regions in this country, they have regional development councils, but their recommendations on how to best administer programs within the region are simply set aside. They are not being considered. And so the attendance in these regional development councils is now composed of representatives of this governor, representatives of that, even regional heads do not attend, because the output, the regional development plans and programs, which they must formulate and submit to NEDA, they are just simply set aside. But a president who believes in federalism can use this section 14, Article 10 of the Constitution. And another way, that's executive action. Another executive action, there are presidential decrees that are still being used by DBM, PDs that have already been repealed. From the national taxes, there are accounts that are being removed, funds that are being removed before the 40% of the local governments are computed. And so, the fund is no longer the same as realized by the BIR, actually collected by the BIR. So, executive action, make sure that those PDs are no longer observed. Moving forward, or you can even make that the national government is indebted to the local governments to the amount that had been removed from the from the national taxes, and therefore affected the share of the local governments. Executive action, it can be done now. Congressional action to make federalism realistic in our country. Congressional action, increase the share of local governments from 40%. The proposal of PDP Laban is to 60%. I will not debate with that. So it needs a congressional action, amendment, not of the Constitution, but of the local government code. Share in the national wealth. Right now, it's 60-40. Reverse it in favor of the local governments. 40% national, 60% local. In the computation of the share of local governments, Mr. Chair, the base year is 3 years prior to the current year, meaning 2018 share of local governments from the national taxes is based on 2015. E di daya, masyadong madaya yun, because the collection in 2015 is lower than the collection in 2017. But the share of national government is based on 2017, based on estimate collection. So hindi fair. Hindi fair. So, Mr. Chair, there are executive initiatives that can be done. to operationalize the principle of decentralization and local autonomy. And there are congressional initiatives that can be done. And therefore, doing away with amending of the Constitution just to institutionalize the new sharing scheme. Even the share of the regional development councils for the regions can be made as a constitution, as an amendment to the local government code, because we are structured in this way. Barangay Development Council, we have a Municipal Development Council, we have a City Development Council, we have a Provincial Development Council, and we have a Regional Development Council. So, this is how we are structured. It is just a matter, and they are autonomous. And the President does not control the local government. Some people think that the President controls the local government. Section 4 of our Article 10 of the Constitution says the President only exercises general supervision over local governments and provinces, over their component cities and their municipalities, and cities and municipalities over the barangays. As long as they perform their functions in accordance with law, then they are free. They cannot question the wisdom of their actions. The same true is with the President. Now, this matter of, we have been 25 years na, local government, 26 years, local government code, ganito pa rin tayo. Eh bakit yung health gusto i-rationalize? Eh bakit maraming pera ang DSWD? Bakit maraming pera ang Department of Health? Bakit maraming pera ang Department of Agriculture? Bakit maraming pera ang Department of Tourism? Under the local government code, these agencies in the regional level should have been phased out 5 years after the effectivity of the law. They should have been phased out because the services that they're supposed to deliver must already have been devolved following the autonomy provision. So, it's a question of, si Dinky Suliman, siya nagdi-distribute. Bakit? Nandun sa kanyang pera bakit ang dami-dami ng pera samantalang addressing the social welfare issue of the people already belongs to the local governments? So, Mr. Chair, amending a constitution must be a matter of absolute necessity and urgency. If we can still fix it by repairing it through legislation or executive action, then let's do it. 7 billion peso, if it is a constitutional convention, according to some analysts, you have to spend. How much will you spend if it's a constituent assembly? The one argument is too cheap, even it's 14 billion. But the point is, they have to go through it when there is no absolute necessity or urgency. I rest my case, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. We will have Governor, kasi local, with the permission of Congressman Neri.
By the way, ang utang ng national government is 1,263.
Yes, one who will shoulder that in a federal state?
1,236 trillion
Yes.
pesos from 1992 to the present. Mr. Chair, kung ma-download lahat yung perang yan, di hindi na aasa sa national government? Hindi na. Yun ang palaging sinasabi, palaging nakaasa kayo Masyado centralized. Sino may kasalanan kung bakit ganun? Hindi natin ini-implement yung batas.
Thank you, Senator. So, with the permission of Congressman Neri, just kasi local.
I yield, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you. And then, para related siya sa local government and local government issues on charter change. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The League of Provinces gave its position about 3 amendments to the Constitution. They're good amendments, Mr. Chairman. Pero sa aking pong karanasan, ang totoo po sa ating pong bansa, hindi naman talaga mabuti ang nangyayari sa ating 1987 Constitution. It is reactionary, verbose, a statement of wishes. It's a piece of literature which was never fleshed out because of interests that are very strong within the business community. I will give charter change a chance, Mr. Chairman. This is a personal view, aside from what my colleague told the body. We always speak about decentralization and autonomy. This is the only government that can give it, but it has to change the form that it is in right now. Why? Ako po nanggaling sa Kongreso. Meron ho kaming biruan na sa Kongreso na nandun kami. That we were all eunuchs. Kasi wala naman kami talagang poder. Pag ano ang sinabi sa itaas, sundin mo. Pag hindi mo sinunod, wala ka. Wala mangyayari sa distrito mo. And how do you get re-elected pag wala kang ginawa para sa distrito mo? And the other thing said, on the other side, sorry, excuse me, but about the Senate, it is the waiting room of 24 presidentiables. Wala naman tayong pwedeng ikaila. Lahat naman ng tao may ambisyon. Yung 1987 Constitution, ito po yung sinulat ng hindi naman normal ang panahon, katulad ng ibang saligang batas na nagkaroon tayo. Malolos, revolutionary. 35, panahon ng Amerikano. The Japanese Constitution. 73, martial law. 87, revolutionary. Demokratiko ba to? Ngayon lang po yung pagkakataon na yung ating presidente pumapayag na magpalitan natin ang ating saligang batas para papabain ang poder sa ilalim through a federal system. Ngayon lang ho ang pagkakataon na in a democratic system, pwede ho tayong magpalit ng saligang batas. Ano ho? Mag-iintay ba tayo ng isa pang dictatorship para palitan ito? O gagawin na natin ang dapat gawin para sa ating bansa? Yun nga, sinabi na ho yung iba ni Joelina. Marami na ho sinabi dito, no? Pero sasabihin ko nga sa inyo, health, agriculture, tourism, marami hong dapat di-revolve talaga ang pondo. Ano ho nangyayari? Ano ba ang budget natin ngayon? It's really looking at the budget. Simple ho. 11% goes to debt servicing. Magkano ang ating MOE? Magkano ang ating PS? Doon pa lang, sa national government budget, 60% na yan. Magkano po ang bumababa sa local government units? 16%. 16%, 60-40, hindi po totoo yun. Kasi yung taxes, yung customs duties, hindi pa ho bumababa sa LGUs. In effect, we make do with what we have. And I will show you also what has happened to how distorted it has become. Cavite is the biggest province in terms of population. Per capita, our population gets 700 pesos per capita. Sa Batanes po, 23,000 pesos ang nakukuha ng mamamayan per capita. Sa Camiguin po, 20,000 pesos per capita. Sa Cavite, 700 pesos. Ang Cavite, ang probinsya namin, 7 na po ang syudad namin, 16 ang bayan. 4 million people. We make do with what we have. But I'm sure, Mr. Chairman, kung bibigyan talaga ng pagkakataon na mag-decentralize ang gobyerno through a federal system, mas lalong lalakas ang ating bansa. Ang problema ho, pag yung mga tao po sa ating centralized form of government, they will never yield that power of the purse, the power of the purse to local government. Hindi ho nila ibibigay yan. Kailangan agawin talaga eh. Yung ba, kailangan ba natin intayin na mag-agawan na naman tayo? Sana ho, mag-usap tayo na maayos, makinig tayo sa isa't isa, tignan natin, kasi nanggaling ho ako sa Kongreso. Ako po'y nanggaling sa Malacanang. Ang nangyari lang, the minority kicked out a majority president, or almost majority president. That was President Erap. Tinanggal po ng oligarchy. Sabihin na natin ng oligarchy. Sa 1987 Constitution, bumalik ang oligarchs. Ito na naman po ang nangyari sa atin. Rent-seeking economy. Nagkaroon tayo ng EPIRA law. Ano ang ginawa ng EPIRA law? Nagmahal ang kuryente, nagpunta sa ilang kamay lang ang poder para sabihin kung anong pwedeng gawin, anong hindi pwedeng gawin. Kaya ito na lang po ang pag-asa natin, Mr. Chairman. Sa tingin ko po, it's the right time, the right call of the President to ask for charter change para naman po magkaroon ng pag-asa. Yung mga tao sa baryo, ako po bilang gobernador, ngayon lang po ako napaupo as local government official. nakita ko po kung gaano kahirap, lalong-lalo na ang buhay ng tiga-baryo. Ang aming bawat piso na aming ginugugol, na aming ginagastos, sinusubukan pa namin pahabain. May magagandang programa po tayo ngayon, pero hindi po sapat. Sabihin natin magandang programa, PhilHealth. Nakakabuti po kasi ang aming ospital, kahit na ang budget namin, 1/3 na ho sa health, at least may nababalik pa ho sa aming kaunti. May 30% ng PhilHealth collection na babalik pa sa probinsya. Ang sinasabi ko nga, Mr. Chairman, wala ho magbibigay, hindi ho ibababa ang pondo. Kahit ano bang batas, walang papasang batas. Sa Kongreso ngayon, walang papasang batas na lakihan ng pondo ng local government. Kasi may interest din ng Congress, may interest ng Senado. May pork barrel sabihin na natin, on paper, wala. Ano ba totoo? Meron naman talaga sasabihin ng congressman, yan, project ko yan Mr. Chairman, pinapagalitan kami ng DILG. Di namin nagastos yung pondo. Bakit? Yung budget namin, meron kami farm to market road, naka-budget, kompleto AIP namin. Bigla na lang nakita ng congressman yung budget, kinopya na. Di, ubus ang project namin. Uulit na naman ang appropriation namin. Mr. Chairman, we have to change the system. Hindi ho magbabago ng kusa yan under the Constitution. 30 years of a verbose statement of wishes na wala naman talagang pupuntahan. Let's give charter change a chance, Mr. Chairman. I hope that sa akin po ito, nanggaling na po ako sa 3 branches ng government. Ito na ho ang pag-asa natin.